Welcome back to Inside the Philippines. Good to have you here. Tonight's story comes from a man named Gunnar Lindqvist, 52 years old when it started. A lineman by trade, 29 years climbing high-voltage transmission towers along the northern coast of Sweden, in weather most of us wouldn't walk the dog in. He's from Sundsvall, up in Västernorrland. If you've never heard of it, that's fine. Gunnar would tell you there's not much reason to. Now, most of the stories we cover on this channel have a villain in them somewhere. Somebody lying, somebody taking. You watch, you get angry, you feel a little safer because at least you'd have spotted it. This one is different. And I want to be honest with you up front. The reason this story has stayed with me since we first spoke to Gunnar is that I've never quite been able to decide who to be angry at. He hasn't either. That's rather the point. He came to Dumaguete after losing something. He wasn't looking for a woman. He'd have told you that flatly, and he'd have meant it. He had a plan, a bank account, and 30 years of experience calculating exactly how much weight a thing can take before it comes down. What he found there was warmer than he expected, in every sense. And what happened over the next 26 months is something he still can't explain to his own sister without her going quiet on the phone. Here's his story, in his own words. I should say, first, that my English is not perfect. I learned it from safety manuals and from American police programs on the television. So sometimes I speak like a machine, and sometimes I speak like a man in a car chase. My sister finds this very funny. Anyway, I climbed towers. That was my work, 29 years, for the regional grid up north. High-voltage transmission, mostly. Storm response. When the wind comes off the Gulf of Bothnia in January and takes down a line, somebody has to go up there and put it back. And for a long time, that somebody was me. People think it's dangerous work. It isn't, really. Not if you respect it. Electricity is honest. It does exactly what the numbers say it will do, every single time. And if you get hurt, it's because you were lazy, or you were tired, or you thought you knew better than the numbers. Steel is honest, too. Ice is honest. You measure, you calculate the load, you know what will fail, and roughly when. 30 years of that, and it gets into you. I still can't walk past a distribution pole without looking at it. I met Ingrid when I was 24. She worked in the municipal housing office. We were married 23 years and we never had children, which was a sadness for a while, and then just became the shape of our life, the way things do. She was 44 when they told us. Parkinson's. Early onset, they said, as if the word early was doing us some kind of favor. I'm not going to make a long story of the 7 years. There's nothing in it you want to hear. I went to part-time so one could be home. I learned things I never imagined a man would learn about his wife. How to move someone who can't help you move them. The catheter. How to time the medication, so she got maybe 40 minutes in the afternoon where she was properly herself. And how you learn to hold those 40 minutes very carefully, like carrying something full to the brim. The last 11 months I slept in a chair beside the bed. Turned her every 2 hours so she wouldn't get sores. 2 a.m., 4 a.m., 6. You stop needing an alarm after a while. The body just knows. She died on a Tuesday in February. I was 51. And here is the thing I've never said out loud to anyone in Sweden, so I may as well say it to you, whoever you are, sitting wherever you're sitting. The grief came. Of course it came. But it came second. What came first was relief. Just for a moment. Maybe 2 seconds. Standing in that room with the nurse. Relief. Like when a storm finally passes and you can come down off the tower. I have never forgiven myself for those 2 seconds. I don't expect to. So then there was after. 11 months of after. I kept waking at 3 in the morning to turn her. Every night. For months. You wake up already reaching, and then your hand finds nothing, and you lie there in the dark, in a house that's too quiet, and you think, well, what now? I sold the house. Then I sold Ingrid's parents' summer cabin outside Härnösand, which we'd kept for 20 years and used maybe 4 times. After the mortgage and the tax, I had a bit over 2.2 million kroner. About 212,000 US dollars, if that means more to you. It was more money than I had ever seen in one place in my life. And I want to be clear about something, because I think people get this wrong. It did not make me happy. It sat in that account like a thing I was minding for somebody else. A lineman's whole working life converted into a number on a screen, and no wife to spend it with, and a state pension I couldn't touch until 62. I sat in a rented flat in Sundsvall, and I watched it snow. That's genuinely what I did. Winter came round again, and I watched it, and I thought, I have maybe 30 more of these. Then Matthias at the depot. His brother had gone to the Philippines, Dumaguete, on Negros, retired there 4 years earlier. And Matthias said this thing that stuck in my head for weeks. He said his brother hadn't worn a jacket since 2019. Hadn't worn a jacket. Not once, in 4 years. I don't know why that was the detail. It was. So I did what you do. I read. I read for 2 months. Cost of living tables, visa rules, the SRRV deposit, hospital standards, typhoon season. I made a spreadsheet, because of course, I made a spreadsheet. Dumaguete looked sensible. A university town, quieter than Cebu, English everywhere, a reasonable hospital, a proper expat population that wasn't only the kind of expat you find in Angeles City. Rent for maybe a fifth of what I'd pay in Stockholm. My money would last, on paper, until I was 90. And there was the other reason, which I did not put in the spreadsheet. Up north I was 51 and finished. Wife dead, house sold, too old for the towers in a few years, the sort of man you nod at in the ICA car park. But over there, from what I read, a big Swede who can wire a house and fix a pump and read a load calculation. That man is still worth something. That man is useful. I needed to be useful. 7 years of being needed every 2 hours around the clock, and then nothing. And I hadn't understood yet that this was a hunger, or that a hunger like that is something other people can see on you. I bought a one-way ticket for the 14th of March. My sister Karin drove me to Arlanda. She said, "You're not running away from something, are you?" I said no. I was, obviously. But I said no. The first thing I noticed in Dumaguete was not the sea. Everyone tells you about the sea. Everyone says, "Ah, you'll come off that plane and smell the ocean." What I saw was the poles. You come out of Sibulan Airport, which is a small airport, and you're driving south along the coast road, and there are these concrete distribution poles every 40 meters with, I don't know how to describe it to a person who isn't in the trade. Imagine a plate of spaghetti nailed to a stick. 30, 40 service drops off one pole, some of them spliced by hand. Insulation gone gray and cracked from the sun, a few just taped. And I'm sitting in this little van with my 2 bags thinking, that whole block, that entire block, is being fed off one service line that in Sweden we would put on maybe 6 houses. My sister says, "This is a sickness with me." She's probably right. And then the heat hit, and I forgot about the poles. I want to be honest about the heat, because I think people underestimate what it does to a northern body. I'm a big man, 98 kilos, built for standing on a steel lattice in -20 with the wind coming off the water. In Dumaguete in March, at 10 in the morning, I could walk maybe 300 meters before my shirt was finished. Completely finished. I had to buy new shirts in the first week, because the ones I brought from Sweden were like wearing a plastic bag. I rented a place 2 streets back from Rizal Boulevard. P 18,000 Dwurn, a month around 3,200 kroner, about $320. Second floor, tiled, a fan, and one air conditioner that made a noise like a man clearing his throat. From the balcony I could hear the tricycles all night, and karaoke from somewhere behind the building. Always the same songs. Always somebody murdering that my way. And the roosters starting around 4. Not one rooster. They go in a chain, one starts, the next answers, all the way down the barangay. I slept badly. But then I always slept badly. The boulevard I need to tell you about, because it matters later. You walk along there in the evening and it's actually lovely. The acacia trees, the seawall, families out, kids with those little plastic bags of fish balls. And then there are the bars, and in the bars there are the men, 65, 70 years old. Red faces, drinking San Miguel at 10 in the morning, which I saw with my own eyes, more than once. And beside them, a girl of 22, 23, looking at her phone, not talking, just there, like a coat on the back of the chair. I judge those men completely. I want to be clear, because this is the part one I've thought about most since. I sat there with my coffee, and I looked at them, and I felt superior. Not sorry for them. Superior. I thought, you sad old fools, you have come 11,000 kilometers to buy something you could have got at home for the price of being a decent person. I was 52. I had a dead wife and 2.2 million kroner, and I thought this made me a different species. Anyway, the wiring in my apartment was trying to kill me. I mean this, literally. I took the faceplate off a socket in the bedroom because the plug was getting warm. Always a bad sign. Warm plug. And behind it, there was aluminium conductor spliced directly to copper with a twist and some electrical tape. Nothing else. No connector, no antioxidant paste, nothing. The copper had gone green and the aluminium was creeping, and the plastic behind the plate was scorched brown in a ring. That's a fire. Not a maybe. That's a fire in a building with one staircase. I photographed it. Then I photographed the panel, which had no ground at all, just a bare bus bar and a piece of wire going nowhere. Then I got my multimeter out of my bag. Yes, I brought a multimeter to the Philippines, we can all laugh, and I took readings and wrote them down. The landlord wouldn't answer his phone, so I went to the barangay hall. Now, I had been in the country 11 days. My English is functional, but it comes out of a manual. So I stood at this counter in a room with a ceiling fan going, and a queue of people and a poster about dengue, and I said something like, "Good morning. I wish to report a defective electrical installation which presents a serious risk of fire, and I have documented the fault, and here are my readings." And the woman behind the counter looked up. She had a stack of papers in front of her, forms for a vaccination drive, and a pen behind her ear, and she was clearly extremely busy, and I was clearly the 11th problem of her morning. Marilu, 39 years old, barangay health worker. Not a young woman, and not a beautiful one, if I'm being accurate. She had a wide face, and a gap in her front teeth, and there were gray hairs she wasn't hiding. She looked at the multimeter in my hand for about 2 seconds. Then she said, "In Sweden, do you also measure the weather before you go outside?" And I laughed, out loud, in a government office. First time I'd laughed since Ingrid. She dealt with it, by the way. She wasn't the right department. It wasn't her job at all. But she made a phone call, and 2 days later a man came and did the splice properly. And I paid for the parts, P1400, about 25. And the landlord never thanked either of us. What happened after that took 4 months. And I want to describe it exactly as it was, because I know what these stories usually sound like, and this wasn't that. Nothing happened. I saw her at the market on a Saturday. We talked for maybe 6 minutes. I saw her again on the boulevard with 2 other women from the health office, and she introduced me, and one of them called me Kano, and Mary-Lou corrected her, said his name is Gunnar, he's Swedish, and I felt absurdly pleased about that for the rest of the day. Then it was on purpose. Coffee at that place near Silliman with the tiled floor and the terrible air conditioning. Halo at Sans Rival, which she liked and I never understood. Ice and beans and purple ice cream and some kind of custard, all in one glass, and she'd eat it, while explaining to me why the sanitation program in her barangay didn't work. She paid for her own. Every time. I offered. She said no. I offered again the next week. She said no again. And the third time she put her hand flat on the table and said, "Gunnar, I have a job." She had a daughter, Angel, 19, at Silliman studying nursing. Her husband had died 6 years earlier. A motorbike, a truck, the usual story here. She'd been a widow longer than I had. I told her about Ingrid in July. Not the whole thing, just that she was sick a long time and I looked after her. Mary-Lou didn't say she was sorry, didn't do the face people do. She just nodded and said, 7 years is very long, and then let it sit there. That was the night. I remember because of the rain. It came down like somebody emptying a bucket. We sat under the awning, waiting it out, and didn't say much for 20 minutes. I went home and slept until 6:30. No 3 a.m. No reaching across for a woman who isn't there. Straight through, first time in nearly 2 years, and I woke up with the roosters already finished, and light on the tiles, and I lay there and thought, oh. Somewhere in there, I stopped counting the days since February. It was August, and she was sitting on the step outside the health office, eating rice out of a plastic container. And she was in a mood, which was rare. I asked what was wrong, and she said nothing. It's fine. And then about 4 minutes later, she said the enrollment deadline was the 12th. Angel was 2 semesters from finishing. Nursing at Silliman. Mary-Lou had paid for 6 semesters out of a barangay health worker's salary, which, if you want the number, is around $14,000 a month, about 2,500 kroner, roughly 250 larn. 12 years old, that job, and she'd raised a daughter on it and buried a husband on it. The remaining 2 semesters plus the fees and the board exam review came to 180,000, about 32,000 kroner, about $3,100. She wasn't asking me. I want to be extremely clear about this because I know how it reads, and I've had a lot of time since to test the memory from every angle, and it holds up. She was eating her lunch, and she was worried, and it came out of her. I said I'll pay it. She said no. I said, Mary-Lou, it's nothing. It's... And she said no, Gunnar. And she said it in a way that closed the subject. So I closed it. 3 days later, I brought it up again in the car park at the Robinsons, of all places, which is where a lot of our important conversations happened for some reason. And this time she cried, which I had not seen her do, not once in 5 months. Not pretty crying. She was furious with herself for it. She said, it's not your responsibility. She said, we are not. And she didn't finish that sentence. I said, I know it isn't. That's why I want to. She said no a 3rd time. Then she said, okay. I paid it at the cashier's window myself. Long queue, a fan going, a girl in front of me arguing about a receipt. And I stood there with the slip in my hand, and I felt, look, I'm going to try to say this properly because it's the whole story, really. For 7 years, I was needed every 2 hours around the clock. Then it stopped, and I found out that a man can be perfectly healthy and comfortable and have money in the bank and still be, functionally, switched off. 11 months in Sundsvall, I was switched off. Standing in that queue, I was on again. It was the best I had felt since before the diagnosis. Not since Ingrid died. Since before she got sick. And it cost me $3,000, which against $212,000 is not even a rounding error. And a 19-year-old girl got to be a nurse. I would do it again. I want to say that plainly. Whatever comes later in this story, I would pay that $180,000 again tomorrow. Now, why did it feel safe? I've made a list because that's how I think and because I've gone over it maybe 400 times since. She never asked, not once, not hinting, not the roundabout way. She resisted 3 times, and the 3rd time she was angry about it. She had a job. Not a good job, but hers, and she went to it. She was 39, not 22. Nothing on her was purchased. The money went to a university, not to a phone or a bag or gold. I could see the building it went into. And this was the big one, the one I built everything on. I was not those men on the boulevard. Those men were buying something. I was helping a woman put her daughter through nursing school. Different category entirely. Different species. That's the fault, by the way. Right there. Not the P180,000. The sentence, I am not those men. Because once you've decided you're a different species, you stop checking your own readings. Anyway, in September she took me to Valencia. It's maybe 20 minutes up from Dumaguete, up into the hills where it actually gets cool at night, and it's green in a way that's almost aggressive. Bananas, coconut, a river. The family house was concrete block with a hollow block extension and a corrugated roof, chickens under it, a basketball court 30 meters away where there are always boys playing, at every hour, in any weather. The father is Ernesto, Tate Ernesto, 71, and on dialysis twice a week down at the hospital in Dumaguete. Kidneys gone from diabetes, which is everywhere here, everywhere. He'd been a jeepney driver 40 years, hands like mine. He didn't speak much English, but we got on immediately, mostly by pointing at things, and he showed me his old jeepney, which was up on blocks behind the house with the engine out, and I spent about an hour with my head under the bonnet of a vehicle I had no ability to fix. The mother, Nanay Lucia. The brother, Boye, 34, who did a bit of construction and a bit of everything. A sister in Cebu. Nieces and nephews I could not keep straight for about a year. I counted 6 that first day. There were 11. And what I saw, sitting there with a plate of pancit on my knee, was the load path. That's a term from my work. In any structure, the load has to travel somewhere. It goes through the members that can carry it, into the ground. And if you look at a structure, honestly, you can always see which member is taking the weight. It was her, since she was 19, before the husband, after the husband. The dialysis, the roof, the school fees for other people's children, the electricity bill on that house, her salary, her. They didn't hide it, and they weren't ashamed of it. They were proud of her. In this country, that is what an eldest daughter is for. And if she'd gone to Dubai or Hong Kong to clean houses for 20 years, like millions of them do, she'd have been exactly the same thing, just further away. There's a word here, utang na loob, and every foreigner who's been here 10 minutes will tell you it means debt of gratitude. And I thought I understood it. I thought it meant they'd be grateful. It's not gratitude. Gratitude is a feeling. That thing is structural. It's a permanent standing obligation that runs in both directions and never zeroes out. and it doesn't care whether you agreed to enter it. Nobody explained this to me. To be fair, nobody had to explain water to a fish. Sunday, we went to Mass. I'm not a churchgoer. I don't think I'd been inside a church since Ingrid's funeral. But you go. And afterwards, Nanay Lucia held my hand in both of hers, outside, in that heat, with the bells still going, and she said, "God sent you to us." And I said something polite, because in Sweden that is a compliment. That is a nice thing, an old lady says. She meant it as a fact, as literal as a delivery. I moved in with Marilou in October, gave up the place near the boulevard. Her apartment in Dumaguete proper, P12,000 a month, near the market, with a shower that ran cold and a neighbor who sang until midnight. And in November, Boyer and I were sitting outside with a couple of San Miguels, and he was telling me about a job he'd worked in Cebu. And then he said, "You know, we have land in Valencia. Family land. From the grandfather." Just said it. Then went back to talking about Cebu. The idea did not come from Boyer. I want to be fair about that, because it would be convenient for me if it had. It came from me in December, standing on that land in Valencia at about 7 in the morning with a coffee, looking at the family house with the chickens under it and 11 people inside it and one toilet, and thinking, this is a bad structure. Not morally, physically. The extension had no proper footing. The roof was tied down with wire in a province that gets typhoons. Tatay Ernesto was sleeping in a room that got no air, and he was on dialysis twice a week, and I stood there and did what I have done my whole working life, which is look at a thing and think, I could fix that. Nobody asked me. Nobody in that family ever asked me for the house. I want that on the record, because later on people in Sweden assumed differently, and I had to correct them, and they didn't believe me. I'd done my reading, by the way. That's the part that gets me. I knew, I could have told you in March, before I ever met her, that a foreigner cannot own land in the Philippines, not through a wife, not through a girlfriend, not through a nominee arrangement, and the corporation structures are complicated and mostly a way for lawyers to eat. I knew this. I'd read the forums. I'd read the actual constitutional provision in English on a government website in my flat in Sundsvall while it snowed. And knowing it is exactly what made me overconfident. Because I thought, the men who lose their houses here are the men who didn't do the reading. I did the reading. I am aware. Awareness felt like protection. It isn't. Knowing the rule and being protected by the rule are two entirely different things. So, the land was family land from the grandfather, and there was a title, and I asked to see it, and they brought it out the same day in a plastic folder with an elastic band. Original certificate, the grandfather's name, transferred to Nanay Lucia. I looked at it for a long time. I photographed both sides with my phone. The house would be in Marilou's name. There was no alternative, and I knew there was no alternative. And I told myself the thing that every man in my position tells himself, which is, I was married 23 years. I know what a partnership is. You don't put a fence between yourself and the person you sleep next to. Budget was P1.4 million, about 250,000 kroner, roughly $25,000. Final cost was $1.9 million, about 340,000 kroner, roughly $33,000. Boyette was the contractor. Of course, Boyette was the contractor. He knew the men. He knew where to buy cement. He could get a truck. And he did do that. I want to be honest. He worked. He was there at 6 in the morning most days. He wasn't lying on a bench somewhere while I paid for it. But the numbers. Here is the thing I still find hard to explain. In my working life, I signed off on material takeoffs. That is a normal part of my job. If a crew tells me they used 400 meters of conductor on a span that needs 320, I ask where the other 80 went, and nobody is offended, because that's the job. The cement didn't reconcile. I did the arithmetic in my head on the way back down to Dumaguete one afternoon. Volume of the slab, volume of the columns, bags per cubic meter, and I came up about 11,000 pesos light. Then, in March, there was a delivery of hollow blocks that got paid twice. I saw both receipts, same date, same supplier, and I said nothing. Not once. 8 months, 1.9 million. And I never once asked Boyer a single question about a number. Because to ask would have been to say, out loud in that house, in front of his mother, "I think you are stealing from me." And I could not do that. The whole thing would have come apart on the spot. There's a thing here about face, about not humiliating a person in front of their family. And I had absorbed enough of it by then to know that a direct question is a kind of violence. So I let it go, and I called it discarte. That's their word for resourcefulness, hustle, making a way where there isn't one. Everybody uses it admiringly. And I told myself, Boyet's markup was discarte. He's got 2 kids. This is how it works here. 30,000 pesos is $500. Don't be that Cano. 30 years of auditing physical systems, and I audited nothing. That's not them. That's me. Other things I noticed and didn't pursue. The second bedroom. At some point, I couldn't tell you when, there was no conversation. It became understood that the second bedroom was for Nanay Lucia and Tatay Ernesto. It was in how people talked about it, where Tatay's bed will go. I heard that phrase maybe in February, and I remember a small cold feeling. And then I remember thinking, well, of course, where else would he go? The man is on dialysis. There was a fellow at the hardware place in Dumaguete, a Brit, Malcolm, been here 19 years. Asked me straight out one afternoon while I was buying conduit, "Whose name's the title in?" I said Marilou's. Then I said, before he could speak, "And it's family land anyway." He said, "Right," and went back to his order. And I was annoyed with him for 2 days. Genuinely annoyed. Rude question. Presumptuous. Typical bitter expat. Been divorced by this country, and now he wants everyone else to fail. I told Marilou about it that evening, and she laughed, and I felt better. He wasn't bitter. He was asking me the only question that mattered, and I filed him as a bad person so I wouldn't have to answer it. And when I asked Marilou about the costs, twice, maybe 3 times, just gently, she'd go uncomfortable. Change the subject. Say Boyer handles that, or don't worry. Or once she said, "Please, Gunner," in a small voice. I read that as sweetness, as her not wanting money between us. It wasn't sweetness. It was the same thing I was doing. Neither of us would say a hard sentence out loud, and we called it love, and it cost me about $30,000. The building itself, though, God. I did the electrical myself. All of it. Bought proper copper from a supplier in Dumaguete. No aluminium anywhere in that house. Every circuit grounded. A real earth rod driven 2 meters down, which I did myself, with a sledge in April in 34 degrees, and a breaker panel, Schneider, P$18,000, about $320, laid out and labeled properly with a legend card on the inside of the door. That panel became famous. I'm not joking. People came from other barangays to look at it. Boyet brought men round. There's a photograph somewhere of 4 Filipino electricians standing in front of my breaker panel like it's a monument. And up on that roof, in that heat, with the sweat running into my boots, and a tool bag, and men who needed telling what to do. I was not a widower. I was not a 52-year-old with a dead wife and a bank account. I was a lineman. First time in 3 years. I'd have paid the $33,000 for that alone. Some days, I still think I did. We finished in July, 4 months late. The blessing was on a Sunday. A priest came up from the parish, and there was salt and holy water flicked into every room, including the CR and Le Chon, and about 60 people in a house built for 4. Angel came in her nursing whites straight from a shift. Tatay Ernesto sat in the doorway of the second bedroom all afternoon. I took a photograph from the yard, of the whole house with everyone spilling out of it, and I sent it to Karen in Umeå with a message that just said, "We finished." She didn't reply for 3 days. August. 3 weeks after the blessing, Tatay Ernesto's fistula clotted. That's the access point in the arm for the dialysis. When it fails, they have to put in a temporary catheter, and there's a procedure, and there's a hospital stay, and it was a Saturday, and Marilu was standing in the corridor at the hospital in Dumaguete on the phone to her sister in Cebu, and I could hear the sister's voice through the phone, and the number being discussed was P46,000, about 8,200 kroner, around $830. I paid it. Obviously, I paid it. The man was in a bed 40 meters away, and I had $200,000, and there was nothing to think about. What I did not understand, and I want you to hear this properly, because if you take one thing from this, it should be this, is that in that family, paying once is not charity. It's enrollment. Nobody said anything. Nobody thanked me in a way that suggested a transfer of responsibility. But the next month, the dialysis bill did not go to Marilu. It came to me. Not handed to me. It was just in the house, on the table, near where I sat. P28,000 a month. About 5,000 kroner. Around $500. Twice a week, indefinitely. For a man of 71 with diabetic kidney failure who could reasonably live another 5 or 6 years. And I paid it. Every month. And here's the thing I need you to understand about that. I could not stop. Not, it would have been awkward to stop. I mean that stopping, it was killing him. There is no mechanism in that province by which a family on that income continues dialysis without somebody paying. And the somebody had been Marilu, at P14,000 a month against a 28,000 bill, which if you do that, arithmetic tells you how they'd been managing before I arrived, which is badly, with help from the sister, and with gaps. There had been gaps. He'd missed sessions. There were no gaps after August. That's a real thing I did. I'm not taking it back. Then, September, the Sari Sari store. Boyade had done the house and done it more or less honestly, by local standards, and he had no work after. And a Sari Sari store in a good spot in Valencia is a legitimate business. It's the shop. It's every barangay's shop. Cigarettes by the stick, sachets of shampoo, Coke, load for your phone, rice by the kilo. $120,000 to set it up. About 21,000 kroner, roughly $1,250. Shelving, a chest freezer, initial stock, the barangay permit. It worked. That's what nobody believes. It worked for 5 months. It made maybe $8,000 a month clear. Boye was there at 6 every morning with the shutter up. Then the stock started going out on Lista. That's the credit book, which is normal. Every Sari Sari store runs a Lista. Everybody pays at the end of the month. Except family doesn't. Family takes, and it goes in the book, and nobody ever collects from a cousin. Because how would you? How do you stand in a shop and demand fee 340 from your mother's sister? By February, the freezer was half empty, and the Lista was P$31,000, and Boye stopped opening on Sundays. That is not theft. I want to be precise, because it matters. Boye did not steal from me. What happened is that I paid for a shop, and what I actually built was a distribution point for the extended family. Because in that context, a shop belonging to your family is not a business. It is a resource. Two different definitions of the same building. I brought mine from Sweden. Theirs was already there, and the rest of it just accumulated. Let me just give you the list, because that's how it actually was. There was no drama in any of it. The nephew, Jomar, needed a motorbike for work. $68,000, around $1,200. He did need it. He got the job. The barangay fiesta in October. We were the family with the new house now, so we were the family that hosts. Lechon, a sound system, 3 days. $35,000, about $630. Every time I flew, I went back to Sweden twice, and Cebu a few times, pasalubong. Not optional, not a nice gesture. If you come back empty-handed, you have insulted 11 people. And I learned that the first time when a niece's face went flat for a whole afternoon. So, chocolates, a bag from the duty-free, a phone for someone. Call it $15,000 a trip. Angel passed her boards, which was the best day of the whole 2 years, and the review course and the fees were $22,000. 2 typhoons. The second one took the roof off Nanay Lucia's sister's house in a different barangay, which is a woman I had met perhaps 4 times, and I paid for the roof. $40,000. And the G-Cash. God, the G-Cash. That's the thing nobody warns you about properly. It's not the big items. It's the phone going at 9 in the morning, $1,500 for medicine, $800 for a school project, $3,000 because someone's tricycle needs a part, $2,200 for a birthday, $600 for load. 20, 30 of those a month from 6 or 7 different people, all of them small enough that saying no would make you a monster over the price of a coffee in Stockholm. I never added them up. I want to stress that. Not once in 24 months did I add them up. Somewhere in there I stopped living on the interest. That's the actual moment, if you want one. I'd set it up so the capital sat in Sweden, and I lived on what it made, plus what I'd taken out at the start. And around November of the second year, I moved money that was not supposed to be moved. And I remember doing it. It took about 90 seconds on my phone, and I was standing in the kitchen in Valencia, and I thought clearly, in words, this is capital. And then I thought, it's fine. That is a man watching his own load go over the rating and writing it in the log and doing nothing. In January, I snapped at her. 2,000 pesos, $36. It was for a niece's uniform, I think, or shoes. And my phone went while I was trying to fix a pump, and I said something like, I don't remember exactly. Something like, does anyone in this family ever want anything that isn't money? Marilu didn't argue. She didn't shout. She just went very still. And then she went quiet. And the quiet lasted 2 days. If she'd shouted, I could have shouted back, and we'd have had a fight like normal people. Instead, there was this politeness. Rice put in front of me. Answers of 4 words. 2 days of a house where nothing was wrong and everything was. I apologized on the second night. She said it's okay. She said, I know it's a lot. And then she changed the subject, and we never spoke about it again. Not once, not in the whole time. March. Robbo, Australian, 71, been in Dumaguete since 2009. Sits at the same table at that place off the boulevard every afternoon. Decent man, actually. Not one of the 10 a.m. drinkers. He asked me, straight out, no build-up. What's your monthly burn, mate? And I opened my mouth to answer him, and nothing came out, because I did not know. I genuinely, truly did not know. I could have told you the sag on a 400 kV span at 40 degrees. I could not tell you what I had spent in the previous 30 days within a factor of 2. He watched me not answer, and he didn't say anything else. Just looked at his glass. That was almost the worst part. One went home. Marilou was asleep, and at about 3:10 in the morning, I was awake, the way I used to be awake. The old hour, the reaching across hour. So I got up, and I sat at the table with the fan going and the roosters not started yet. And I opened the laptop, and I opened a blank spreadsheet. It took 3 nights. I want to describe the work because the work is the point. 26 months of statements from Handelsbanken downloaded as CSV. The Gcash history, which only goes back so far in the app, so I had to piece some of it together from the SMS confirmations, and there were, I stopped counting at 411 transactions. Cash withdrawals from the BDO on Purtises Street, which I could see as withdrawals but not as anything else, so those went in a column marked cash, unallocated. I did it at the table with the fan going 1 till about 4 in the morning, then 2 more nights the same. Marilou asked once what I was doing. I said accounts. She said okay, and went back to bed. That's a lie by omission, and I counted against myself, not her. By the 3rd night, I had it in categories. Because that's what you do. You don't just total a thing, you find out where the current is going. The house, $900,000. Tuition and the board review, $202,000. Dialysis, from August of year 2, plus the fistula procedure and 2 other hospital events, $589,000. The store, $120,000 plus about $40,000 in restocking I'd forgotten I'd done. Motorbike, Fiesta, roofs, Pasalubong, various, about $310,000. Gcash, small transfers, 26 months, $1,340,000. That last one is the one. 1,340,000 pesos in amounts averaging around 3,000. Nobody ever asked me for 100,000. They asked me for 2,611 times, plus my own living. Rent before I moved, food, the trips, the visa runs, because I was still on tourist extensions this whole time, going down to the immigration office on Real Street every 2 months with my passport and $4,000 and a queue, which is a stupid way to live for 2 years. And yes, I'd looked at the SRRV, and no, I never applied, because the deposit was $20,000 for a man my age, and I kept thinking I'd do it next month. Total out, 190,000 pesos and change. At the rates I'd actually been converting at over that period, that's about 1,530,000 kroner, about 147,000 US dollars. I had started with 212, 65,000 left, and I sat there and did the last calculation, which took 8 seconds, because at $150,000 a month all in, that was the real run rate. I could see it now. It was right there in front of me, in a column. $65,000 is 22 months. 22 months. And I was 54. My pension is at 62. So there was a whole of 6 years in the middle of my life with nothing in it. I sat there until the roosters started. I remember there was a moth going at the laptop screen, one of those enormous ones, and I let it. And here's the thing, and I need you to believe me because this is the only part of the story that is hard to say without sounding like I'm lying to make myself look good. I did not feel robbed, not for 1 second. I went through the whole spreadsheet looking for the theft because a theft would have been a relief. Honestly, a theft would have meant somebody did this to me, and it wasn't there. Boyette's markup on the house, if I'm generous to myself, was maybe 180,000 over 2 years, against 8 million. It's noise. It doesn't even show up. Every other number in that document was a thing I had done on purpose, while awake, with my own hands, and mostly happily. In my work, when a line comes down, you go and you find the fault. Usually it's a component. a failed insulator, a corroded splice, a bird. You replace it and you go home. But sometimes you go out there and every component is fine. Everything is within spec. Everything is exactly as it was built, and the line still came down. And then you have a much worse morning, because it means the fault is in the design. Somebody sized it for a load that never actually turned up. And you cannot repair that. You can only rebuild it or accept it. There was nothing wrong with any of the components. 4 days later, Sunday, we're up in Valencia. Lunch, after Mass. The whole crowd, maybe 18 people, kids on the floor, the fan on the wall going back and forth, the sound of the basketball court, someone's phone playing music. Tinolang manok and rice, and Nanay Lucia had made leche flan. And Joanna, Marilou's niece, 16, does well at school, wants to be a teacher, a genuinely nice kid. Joanna is teasing her aunt about something, and she says, in that bright teenage way, laughing, "Tita is so lucky. We were praying so long for someone." And the table laughed. Everyone laughed. It was a joke. It was affectionate. She wasn't being cruel. She has never been cruel in her life. She was 16, and she said an obvious thing at a family lunch. There were about 2 seconds where I looked at Marilou, and Marilou did not laugh and did not look at me. Then it moved on, and someone passed the rice. I didn't say anything at that table. I've been asked why. The answer is that I had already known it for 4 days, and Joanna just said it out loud. And there's no argument to have with a true sentence. I showed Marilou the spreadsheet on the Tuesday. Not as an accusation. I want to be honest about that, too. I wasn't building a case. I turned the laptop round on the table and I said, "I want you to look at this." She looked at it for a long time. Long enough that I got up and put water on and came back, and she was still looking. She's not stupid, Marilou. She runs a barangay health program on nothing. She can read a table of numbers. And she didn't deny it. She didn't cry. She didn't say, "It wasn't like that." There was no scene. If there 500 been a scene, one could have, I don't know, something. She said, "I thought you knew." And then she said the rest of it, quietly. And I'm going to try to give it to you the way she said it, because it's her side and she's entitled to it. She said she'd been carrying them since she was 19, that when her husband died she carried them harder, that her salary was $14,000 a month, and the dialysis was $28, and she'd been finding the difference for 4 years by borrowing, by the sister in Cebu, by going without, and by her father missing sessions, which she said in a very flat voice. She said, "I didn't take it from you. You put it there." Which is true. It's the truest sentence anyone said to me in 2 years. And then she asked me a question. And she wasn't being clever. She genuinely wanted to know. She had this puzzled look. She said, "Gunnar, what did you think was going to happen?" I had no answer. I still don't. Really. What did I think was going to happen? I built a house for a family with 11 people in it, and 1 toilet, and a man on dialysis, and then I was surprised that a family with 11 people in it kept needing things. Here's what I understood, sitting there. She loved me. I'm not going to have that argued with. 2 years of a woman making my coffee the way I like it, and sitting up with me on the bad nights, and correcting people who called me Kano. That was real. And I was also infrastructure. I was the thing that arrived and made the load survivable. Both. At the same time. And in her world, those 2 facts were not in any tension whatsoever. A good man provides. That's what a good man is. That's what her husband would have been if he'd lived. That's what a daughter in Dubai is. That's what God sending someone means. The contradiction was mine. I imported it. I brought it in my luggage from Sweden, along with the multimeter. I spent about a week after that trying to find someone to be angry at. Genuinely trying. I'd sit on the wall by the boulevard and go through them one at a time. Boye, Nanay Lucia, Marilu, the country, myself, mostly. But even that didn't hold, because which decision would I take back? The tuition? The dialysis? There wasn't anybody. That's the brutal part. Not the money. The absence of a villain. At the end of that week, I opened the airline site and priced Dumaguete Manila Doha Stockholm. I didn't book it for 9 days. 9 days, and then I booked it, and then I told her. She said, "When?" I said the 11th of June. She said, "Okay." And then she asked whether I wanted her to cook something for the last Sunday. And I said yes. And that was the entire conversation about the end of a 2-year relationship. 12 seconds, maybe. I know how that reads. I've thought about it a lot. It isn't coldness. It's that neither of us had ever once said a difficult sentence out loud in 2 years, and we weren't going to start at the end. 2 bags. That's what I took out. The same 2 I came with, and one of them was mostly tools I couldn't bring myself to leave. My meter, a crimper, the good pliers. What I left was a house in Valencia. Concrete, proper footings, 4 rooms, a roof that will hold in a storm, and in the utility corner a Schneider breaker panel laid out and labeled properly with a legend card on the inside of the door. P 1.9 million. In Marilu's name, on land that was never going to be mine in any universe, under any arrangement, no matter what I'd signed. Robbo told me to fight it. So did Malcolm from the hardware place, the one who'd asked me the question I didn't want. They both said the same thing. Get a lawyer. Put a lien on it. At least make a claim for the construction cost. There's men who've had partial recovery. I said no, partly because I'd read the law, and the law is not ambiguous, and a case would have cost me a year and 300,000 pesos to lose slowly instead of quickly. But mostly because I knew what it would actually be. It would be a 54-year-old Swede in a Dumaguete courtroom trying to take a house off a widow and a man on dialysis. And whatever the paperwork said, that is what it would have been. I'd have won or lost, and either way, I'd have become the thing I spent 2 years congratulating myself on not being. So, no, that house is theirs. It was always going to be theirs. I just didn't say that sentence to myself while I was paying for it. The airport was the 11th. Sibulan, which, as I said, is a small airport. You can see the plane from the road. Angel came, in her whites, straight off a shift at the hospital. She hugged me and cried, and that was the hardest 30 seconds of the whole 2 years, considerably harder than the spreadsheet. Marilu didn't cry. She didn't beg. She didn't do a scene. She didn't ask me to stay, and she didn't apologize. She said, "Thank you for everything you did for my family." Correctly, formally, the way you'd thank a person at the end of something that had a proper shape. And standing there in that heat with my 2 bags, I finally got it, properly, in my body, and not just on a spreadsheet. She wasn't ashamed. There was nothing in her to be ashamed about. In her accounting of the last 2 years, a good man had come and helped her family, and now he was going home. And that was a good thing that had happened. And the fact that it ended did not make it a crime. I'd been waiting for an apology that could not exist. There was no offense. So, the numbers, since you've come this far. $63,000 when I landed at Arlanda. down from 212. 26 months. A house I don't own, in a country I can't own land in. Karen picked me up. She'd known. The 3 days she didn't reply to that photograph of the blessing, that was her deciding not to say anything. And she never did say anything. Not once, not then, and not since. She just drove me to Umeå and put me in the spare room and made coffee. I'd have preferred she said, "I told you so." I think she knew that too, and didn't, on purpose. Where I am now. 14 months on. I'm back with the grid operator. Storm response contract, which is what they give you at my age when you come back. You don't get the regular crew rotation, you get the call-outs. 2 in the morning, sleet coming sideways off the Gulf of Bothnia, a downed span somewhere north of Härnösand. I rent a flat in Sundsvall. 1 bedroom. I wear a jacket most of the year. And I send 8,000 pesos a month towards Tatay Ernesto's dialysis. About $145. I set that figure myself in advance, in writing, and I told Marilu it will not change and it will not increase, and it does not respond to emergencies. When there is an emergency, I say, "I'm sorry, I can't," and it is the most uncomfortable sentence I have ever learned to say. And I say it every time. I call her on Sundays. She tells me about the barangay, about Angel's rotations, about who's had a baby. 20 minutes. It's not a performance on either side. I don't fully know what to call it, and I've stopped needing to. Here's what I've got, and then I'll stop. I spent 29 years sizing conductors, and the whole job, the entire job, when you strip it down, is that you calculate for the load that will actually be on the line. Not the load in the drawings. Not the load somebody hopes for. The real one, with the ice on it, and the wind behind it, and everything that gets connected later. You do not run a line, and then find out. You find out, and then you run the line. I went to the Philippines, and I connected myself to a load I never once measured. 11 people. A dialysis machine, a shop that was actually a distribution point, an entire family who had been drowning quietly for 20 years, whose eldest daughter had been the only cable holding it up since she was 19, and who, reasonably, decently, without any malice whatsoever, took the help that arrived. Nobody lied to me. Not once. I want that on the record more than anything else I've said. The failure wasn't in the Philippines, and it wasn't in her. It was that I arrived with a hole in me the size of 7 years of being needed, and every single peso went into filling it. And a hole like that will take everything you have and still be a hole. If you're thinking of doing what I did, and I know some of you are, that's why you're watching this at 1 in the morning, I'd say only this. Not, don't go. Go. It's a good country, and I'd defend it to anybody. But work out your number first. Before you love anybody. Write it down, the monthly figure, the maximum, and know what happens when you hit it. Because a man who does not know his own number will not find out on a good day. He'll find out at 3 in the morning, with a spreadsheet, and by then, it's arithmetic. That's all I've got. You've just heard from Gunnar Lindqvist, and I want to sit with something before we go. There's no villain in that story. We looked. There's no dating site, no fake profile, no other boyfriend, no forged title, no dramatic reveal. There is a family that was quietly failing, a woman who had carried them alone for 20 years, and a lonely man with $200,000 and an unmet need to be useful. Put those two things in a room, and the arithmetic runs by itself. That's the brutal truth in the title, and it's why this one doesn't trend. It's much easier to warn people about scammers. It's much harder to tell a man that the thing most likely to bankrupt him here is his own generosity, operating exactly as designed, with nobody at the wheel. So the question isn't whether she loves you. She might. Both things can be true, and in this country, they very often are. The question is, what is your monthly number? And have you ever actually written it down? By the standards of this channel, Gunnar got out well. He kept a third of it. He kept his dignity, he kept the relationship in some honest form, and he did not become a bitter man on a bar stool telling everyone this country took everything from him. That's rarer than you'd think. Thanks for watching. If this one landed, you know what to do. And we'll see you next time inside the Philippines.